My name is Frank Dawson, and if you had met me a year ago, you'd say I was just another 57-year-old bloke living a quiet, ordinary life. Nothing wild, nothing dramatic, just the slow, steady rhythm of a man who worked hard, paid his dues, and wanted to spend the rest of his years in peace. I wasn't rich, but I wasn't struggling either. I had my routines, my yard to look after, my tools neatly lined up in the garage, and this old wooden deck I built with my own rough hands back when my back didn't creak like a rusty hinge. My house wasn't big or fancy, but it was mine. Every board, every wall, every damn nail carried a memory of who I used to be and who I became. It was the one place on earth where I felt like I belonged. So imagine my shock, the kind that hits you in the gut and steals your breath, when I found out my own flesh and blood, my son, was trying to sell the roof over my head. Not borrow against it. Not ask for a share of it. Not talk through it like a man. Sell it. Behind my back. Like it was some broken lawn mower he found at a garage sale. People talk about betrayal like it's dramatic or poetic, but let me tell you, when it comes from your kid, the one you raised on your own, the one you sacrificed everything for, it doesn't feel dramatic. It feels like someone reaches into your chest and squeezes until your heart cracks. It feels personal. It feels dirty. It feels like your whole life was some kind of joke, and everyone knew the punchline except you. But here's the part that still makes me laugh. Not a happy laugh. Not a proud laugh, more like one of those tired, bitter chuckles a man makes when life decides to smack him across the back of the head. My son, my grown, stubborn, entitled son, had no bloody clue that just 1 week earlier, 7 quiet days before his grand little scheme, I had gone down to the county office and changed the deed. He didn't know I moved my house into a trust he couldn't touch. He didn't know the paperwork he thought he could easily grab was now locked behind signatures, protections, and legal barriers thicker than concrete. The timing was perfect. Accidental but perfect. And you know what? This story I'm about to tell you, it isn't fueled by rage. I'm not here to scream or curse or tell you how I smashed something in anger. No. This story is about reality, the cold, unfiltered kind that punches a man right in the face when he starts believing the world owes him shortcuts and favors. My son thought life was a vending machine. You press a button and something drops for free. He thought I was that vending machine. Reliable, predictable, always stocked, always giving. He was wrong. He learned it the hard way. And this lesson, well, it's one he'll remember for the rest of his life. I know people judge parents for being too soft or too hard, but when your own child tries to rip away the one thing you spent your whole life building, mate, it forces you to look at yourself and ask, where did I go wrong? Was I too gentle, too forgiving? Did I fail to teach him the value of work, the meaning of respect, the weight of choices? Or did he simply grow into someone who believed taking was easier than earning? I wish I had an answer. But what I do have is a story. A long one. A messy one. A painful one. But also a necessary one. This is the story of how my son tried to sell my house without my knowledge. How he thought he could outsmart me. How he believed he had already won. And how, in the end, he discovered a truth he never saw coming. You can't steal what you never owned. And you sure as hell can't fool a man who built his entire life from the ground up. This is the story of the house he never owned. And the last lesson a father had to teach his son, even when it broke his heart to do it. I never imagined myself as the kind of father who'd end up staring his own son's betrayal in the face. You hear stories, neighbors whispering, folks on the news talking about family turning on family. But you always think, no, not me, not my kid. You believe you raised them better. You trust the years you spent working, teaching, guiding would mean something. But life has this twisted habit of tapping you on the shoulder, smirking and saying, hey Frank, mate, you're not done suffering yet. And when it hits, it doesn't knock softly. It barges right in, boots muddy, kicking your piece around like it owns the place. I raised my boy, Ethan, alone from the time he was 9. His mother, God rest her confused soul, left without even a note. One normal morning she was hugging him goodbye, brushing his hair back from his forehead like she always did, telling him she'd bring home his favorite strawberry ice cream. And by the time the sun dipped behind the maples that evening, she was gone. No word, no trace, nothing but an empty closet and a hollow space at the dinner table, the kind of silence you don't forget. The kind that settles into the walls like dust and doesn't leave. So it was just me and him. A father and his boy. Two Dawsons trying to keep life stitched together with half-worn thread. I worked double shifts, sometimes triple if winter came early or the bills stacked higher than my patience. I made his lunches every morning, scribbled little notes in the corner of the napkin, even though I pretended I didn't. I sat through every parent-teacher conference, every school play where he stood in the background dressed like a tree, every basketball game, even if he barely touched the ball. I was there, always. Even when I was exhausted, even when the weight of the world felt like sandbags on my shoulders, I'd show up, wipe my face clean, and be Dad. Looking back, I realize maybe I said yes too often. Maybe I covered for him when I should have let him fall. Maybe I worked too hard to make sure he never felt the pain I did growing up. I came from a tough childhood, one of those houses where love was something you earned, not something you were given. And I swore Ethan would never feel that. I promised myself I'd give him everything I never had. But sometimes, giving too much doesn't make a child grateful. It makes them believe life owes them something. And I didn't see that lesson unraveling until it was too damn late. Our house, my pride, my sanctuary, was a warm little 2-story place on a quiet Ohio street where the trees leaned in like they were listening to your secrets. It wasn't large or luxurious, but it was mine, built from long days, busted knuckles, and choices that cost me sleep. I laid the wooden deck myself, one plank at a time, stopping only when my back screamed louder than my stubbornness. I painted the kitchen twice, first a soft yellow that looked awful in the morning light, then a warm cream color that finally felt right. I repaired the roof so many times the shingles probably knew my name. Every corner of that home carried a memory, some loud, some quiet, some that brought tears if I sat with them too long. That house wasn't just a structure. It was a living piece of my story. A chapter of every sacrifice I made. And for years I dreamed that one day, maybe when I was old and creaky, Ethan would bring his kids over, let them run around the yard, carve their initials in the tree out back just like he once did. I imagined holidays filled with laughter, the smell of turkey cooking, my grandkids tugging at my sleeves. I thought the house would travel down through the Dawson bloodline, a piece of me he'd treasure. But instead, that boy, my boy, wanted to sell it right out from under me. Not talk about it, not reason through it, not sit down like a man and ask for help. No. He wanted to take the only thing in my life that had stayed loyal, the only thing that held me steady through storms, and trade it for a quick bailout from his bad decisions. Why? Well, life had given him a fair few slaps recently. A baby on the way with a girl he barely knew. Debt stacking up like dirty laundry. Bills he ignored. Choices he made when he wasn't thinking straight. And instead of owning up, instead of fixing himself, instead of grinding through the mess he created, he looked at my house like it was some magic button he could push to reset his life. He was drowning, yeah, I'll admit that. But I had no idea he was planning to grab me by the collar and drag me under with him just to keep his own head above water. And the worst part, even before the storm fully formed, even before I knew what he was plotting, something in me could feel it. That uneasy shift in the air, the way he avoided eye contact, the sudden politeness that didn't feel like him at all. It was like standing outside on a still summer day when the sky is strangely quiet, birds gone silent, wind holding its breath, that eerie calm that tells you a tornado about to tear through your world. This was the calm before the storm. And I didn't even see the thunder coming. It never begins with an explosion. Betrayal doesn't walk through the door wearing a bright red coat and waving its arms around. No, it starts as a whisper, a tiny shift, something so small you tell yourself you imagined it. And if you're like me, an old soft-hearted fool who spent years cleaning up after his son, you look the other way because the truth is too damn heavy to face. But looking back now, every warning sign was right there, blinking like a neon light, and I ignored it until it was nearly too late. It started with little things. Late-night calls when the world outside was quiet enough to hear your own heartbeat. My phone would buzz at 11:45 p.m., 1 a.m., sometimes even later, and Ethan's name would flash on the screen. I'd answer half asleep, my voice rough, chest tight with that familiar worry every parent carries long after their kids are grown. "Hey Dad, you awake?" That's how he always started, soft, hesitant, the kind of tone you use when you're trying to ease your way into a conversation you know isn't right. His voice would shake ever so slightly, just enough to make me sit up in bed, just enough to press that fatherly panic button inside me. Then came the same song and dance, a quick favor, a temporary situation, a small loan. $200 here, $500 there. Then it jumped 800, 1,000, 1,200, and every time I told myself it was just a rough patch, just a temporary bump, just something a good father helps his son through. But deep down, something felt wrong. Not because he needed help, but because every request felt rehearsed, like he'd said it in the mirror a few times before dialing my number. When he talked, he didn't sound like my boy anymore. He didn't sound like the messy-haired kid who used to run down the stairs yelling for pancakes. He sounded like a salesman trying to close a deal before the customer changed their mind. There was this polished edge to his voice, forced charm, practiced humility, pretend vulnerability. And I could hear the tension underneath, that quiet crackle of someone trying to hold their life together with duct tape and denial. I kept helping anyway, a dad's reflex. You don't just turn off the part of your heart wired to protect your child. But each time I sent him money, a strange heaviness settled in my chest. Something was off. Something was slipping. And then the comments started. They came lightly at first, dressed as jokes, wrapped in laughter that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Dad, the house must be worth a lot now, right? Ever think about downsizing? You know, less cleaning, less yard work. If something ever happens to you, I guess the house comes to me, yeah." He'd say it with this half grin, a casual shrug, trying to make it sound like idle chit-chat. But the tone was all wrong. There was too much eagerness behind the words, too much curiosity, like he wasn't joking at all, just testing the waters, waiting to see how I'd react. And every time he brought it up, my stomach tightened like someone was twisting a rope inside me. One morning, quiet, a bit chilly, the kind of morning where you stand on the porch and smell the dew, he showed up unannounced. No knock, no call, just walked right in like he used to when he was a kid. But there was no warmth in his presence this time. He didn't greet me, didn't ask how I was doing. Instead, he wandered around the living room with this distracted, calculating air about him. He paced slowly, dragging his fingertips along the walls, the mantel, the edges of picture frames. His eyes didn't scan the room like someone revisiting childhood memories. They scanned it like a real estate agent inspecting a property before a showing. He measured the space with his gaze, checked the condition of the flooring, peeked down the hall as if evaluating layout. There was something clinical and cold about the way he looked around. "Dad," he finally said, stopping in the middle of the living room like he was about to deliver a sales pitch. "You're 57. You've worked hard your whole life. Don't you think it's time to retire soon? Maybe move somewhere smaller, somewhere easier?" I put down the mug I was holding and looked straight at him. "Why?" I asked slowly. "Are you talking like this?" He chuckled immediately, waving his hand like I was overreacting. "Relax, Dad. Come on. I'm just thinking about your comfort. You know, future plans and all that." But people show their truth in their eyes long before they speak. And when I looked at his, I didn't see concern. I didn't see genuine care. I didn't see love or worry or responsibility. What I saw was fear. Desperation. Someone running out of options. Someone cornered by life, clawing for anything that would give him an escape, even if that escape meant taking something that wasn't his. And let me tell you something, when a man's eyes shift like that, when kindness turns into hunger and innocence turns into calculation, you feel it deep in your bones. You don't need proof. You don't need explanations. You just know. That was the moment, right there in my own living room, when I saw the first real red flag waving in the wind. Not a tiny warning, not a whisper, a full, bright, glaring sign that said, "This isn't your boy anymore. This is a man planning something. Something he doesn't want you to see until it's too late." And trust me, mates, that look he had, that's the look of someone already imagining the betrayal and convincing himself he's justified. The day everything snapped wasn't dramatic. No thunderstorm, no wind howling through the trees, no sign from the heavens that my world was about to tilt. It was just a regular Tuesday morning, the kind where nothing happens and you don't expect anything to. I just poured my second cup of coffee, the kind that tastes like burnt hope but still keeps you going, when my phone buzzed. Linda's name flashed on the screen, my neighbor for 15 years, the woman who brought over cookies every Christmas even though I kept telling her I wasn't a sweets guy. If Linda was calling before noon, something was up. "Frank," she said the moment I picked up, voice tight like she was trying not to panic, "there's a young man outside your house taking photos. Looks like he's from a real estate office." I froze, mug halfway to my lips. "What kind of photos?" I asked, though I already knew I wouldn't like the answer. "The kind they take when they're planning to sell a place." My heart punched against my ribs. For a second I thought maybe she was wrong. Maybe the guy was lost. Maybe he was taking photos of the trees, the streetlights. Hell, maybe he was an artist who got confused and thought my porch was inspirational. Wishful thinking. I stepped outside, the cold air smacking me awake, and there he was, some baby-faced realtor with a fancy camera, crouching at an angle like he was shooting the cover of a home magazine. He didn't even notice me at first. That's how comfortable he felt trespassing on my life. "Can I help you, mate?" I said, forcing a polite tone even though my blood was starting to simmer. He jumped, laughed nervously, and said, "Oh, hi sir. Sorry, didn't mean to startle you. I'm just doing a preliminary evaluation. Your son scheduled it. House photographs beautifully, by the way." "My son scheduled what?" "Preliminary evaluation. For my house." My grip tightened around the coffee mug. "And how much," I said slowly, "did he tell you he owns of this property?" The realtor blinked like I'd asked the square root of a lemon. Then he shrugged casually, and said, "He mentioned the deed would be transferred to him soon anyway. Standard stuff before listing." Standard stuff. Standard stuff. Mate, I felt something inside me snap, but not like a twig, more like an old rope holding too much weight for too many years. It didn't snap all at once. It frayed, fibers giving way until the whole thing let go. I didn't explode. I didn't scream. That almost would have been easier. No, what I felt was disappointment so heavy it settled in my chest like wet cement. The kind you can't cough out, can't ignore, can't pretend isn't suffocating you. Ethan, my boy, the kid I taught to ride a bike in the driveway of this very house. The kid I carried when he scraped his knees. The kid I stayed up nights for when he had a fever. That boy had walked into some office and said, "Yep, that's gonna be my house. Go on and prep the listing." Like it was a car I left to collect dust. Like it was a shed I wasn't using. Like I wasn't alive, breathing, drinking coffee on the porch he'd just decided to sell. The realtor kept talking, something about comps, market value, curb appeal, but it all turned into white noise. I just stood there, staring at the kid who didn't even realize he'd been hired to document a betrayal. When he left, cheerful as ever, I remained on the porch long after he drove away, mug growing cold in my hand. The house felt different. Not unsafe, just betrayed, like it knew what was coming before I did. And that was the moment I realized something important. Ethan wasn't just desperate. He wasn't just struggling. He was plotting. And worst of all, he thought I was too old, too blind, too naive to see it coming. But the poor bloke had no idea I'd already changed the deed. He had no clue the trap he set was about to snap shut on him, not me. And trust me, that realization was the only warmth I felt that entire day. Now here's the part of the story that still makes me grin like an old fox who finally outsmarted the hounds. It didn't happen out of anger, or spite, or even some grand plan for revenge. No, mate, this twist was born out of a feeling, a whisper in the back of my mind that had been buzzing for months, maybe even years. Something telling me that the world wasn't as steady as I wanted it to be, that the boy I raised wasn't as solid as the foundation of the home he was trying to sell. You ever get that instinct, that heavy clawing feeling in your gut saying, something coming, brace yourself? Well, that feeling had been dancing around my ribs for a while. At first, I ignored it, brushed it off as exhaustion or paranoia. I mean, what father wants to admit he might need to protect himself from his own son? But that whisper grew louder, sharper, more persistent, until it practically smacked me in the face one morning. I woke up, looked around my bedroom, and had this sudden jolt. This realization that if I didn't secure the one thing I had built with my own hands, someone else might try to take it. So I grabbed my coat, my reading glasses, and an old folder with every document that mattered to me, and I drove down to the county office. The building smelled like paper that had died a long time ago, mixed with the faint odor of burnt coffee. You know the smell, government offices always carry it like a badge of honor. I waited in line behind a guy arguing about a fence permit and a woman trying to register a boat she didn't own yet. And there I was, holding my life in a folder, feeling weirdly calm. When it was finally my turn, I approached the counter and met a clerk named Bob. Now Bob, he looked like he'd been sitting at that desk since Nixon was president. His tie was crooked, his eyes tired, and his breath smelled like coffee that had been reheated 12 times. But he was polite, and that's a rare gem in those places. "Morning," he said, barely glancing up. "Morning, mate," I replied, sliding the folder toward him. "I need to make a change to my property deed." He raised an eyebrow, probably not used to seeing someone my age who wasn't being forced by their kids or their lawyer. "What kind of change?" Now this is where it gets good, because I'd spent weeks reading, researching, thinking, making sure I didn't walk in blind. "I want to move the property into a living trust," I told him, "under someone I trust." Bob nodded like he'd heard it 1,000 times. He started typing, asking questions, verifying information. His fingers clacked on the keyboard at the speed of a glacier, but eventually, he slid the paperwork across the counter for me to sign. The beneficiary. My niece Caroline. Why her? Because she was the only person in the entire family who never asked me for a single thing, not money, not favors, not loans. She visited because she cared, not because she wanted something. When her mom died, she stayed with me for a few months, never once complaining, never once taking advantage. She grew up, worked hard, built her own life. She didn't want my house, she wanted me safe. And that's the kind of person you trust with your legacy. So I put her name on the trust, not to give her the home, but to put a legal shield around it. A shield that said, "No one touches this house unless Frank says so." Not my son. Not a debt collector. Not some realtor with pretty teeth and a camera. Bob handed me the final stamped document, and I felt this heavy weight lift from my chest. It was like putting armor on the house, like fitting it with a security system no thief could crack. I walked out of that building feeling 10 years younger and just a little smug, because something in me knew this wasn't just preparation. This was inevitable. See, Ethan didn't know a damn thing. He didn't know the deed wasn't in my name anymore. He didn't know selling the house would require my signature and the trustees' approval and a mountain of paperwork he couldn't fake. He didn't know his little plan was already dead in the water. And the part that makes me grin the most, he was out there, scheming, planning, convincing himself he was about to make the smartest move of his life, while I had already outplayed him before he even started. Old age doesn't make you slow. It makes you cunning. It makes you see angles kid don't even know exist. And that deed switch, that was the smartest bloody thing I'd done in years. Little did Ethan know. He was walking straight into a trap of his own making. And I was waiting, calm as a man watching rain hit the window, ready to see how his little plan would fall apart piece by piece. That evening is carved into my memory like someone took a knife to the inside of my chest and left the mark there on purpose. The weather was calm, peaceful even, with the kind of soft orange sunset that should have brought comfort. But inside my home, inside the walls that held my laughter, my sweat, my struggle, something ugly was about to take place. I heard Ethan's car pull into the driveway, the heavy bass of his music rattling the windows like he was announcing himself to the neighborhood. I watched through the blinds as he stepped out, dressed nicer than usual, hair gelled, shirt tucked in. He was walking with this confidence. No, not confidence, entitlement. The kind of confidence only someone who hasn't learned enough hard lessons can possess. He knocked once and then let himself in like he owned the place. That alone told me everything. "Hey, Dad," he said, grinning ear to ear like a man who just secured a check he didn't deserve. "We need to talk." I stayed sitting in my old recliner, arms folded, legs stretched out. I didn't smile, didn't move, didn't give him an inch. "Yeah," I said slowly, "we do." He took a seat on the edge of the couch, but his energy was all over the place. His leg bounced so fast the cushion shook. He kept wiping his palms on his jeans, then forcing a smile again, like he was practicing a pitch he wasn't sure would land. "So," he began, dragging out the word like a man preparing to lie, "I've been thinking." "That's rare," I said, just to test him. He chuckled awkwardly, choosing to ignore the jab. "You're getting older, Dad. You're working too hard. This house." He looked around the room like he was inspecting merchandise, not memories. "It's too much for you. Stairs, yard work, maintenance, it's all a lot." I tilted my head. "Funny, I've been doing it just fine." "Yeah, but you shouldn't have to," he pressed. "You should enjoy life a little, relax, move into something smaller, something simple. I actually found a perfect apartment near the lake, brand new, good neighborhood, no yard work. You'd love it." He said perfect apartment like he'd rehearsed it in front of a mirror 20 times. His voice cracked on the word love, like he didn't even believe it himself. "And what," I asked, "happens to this house?" He sucked in a deep breath, exhaling dramatically like the victim in the story he was crafting. "Well, I figured we could sell it." He paused, carefully choosing his words. "Split the money. You'd have enough to be comfortable for years and, well, I can take care of my family, provide for my kid, you know." There it was. The confession without the confession. The mask slipping. The truth revealing itself in tiny cracks. He didn't want to help me. He wanted to use me. He wanted to cash me in like a scratch-off lottery ticket. "And if I say no?" I asked, keeping my voice calm, too calm. That's when he smirked. That arrogant little smirk kids get when they think they've outsmarted the person who raised them. He leaned back, stretched his arms across the couch like he owned the place, and said, "Dad, come on, you can't live here forever. The house will be mine eventually anyway. You're just delaying things." Just delaying things. Like my entire life was an obstacle in his timeline. Like the home I built brick by bloody brick was nothing but an asset waiting to be cashed in. It felt like someone reached into my chest and squeezed my heart until it cracked. Not from anger, no, anger would have been easier. This was pure disappointment, the kind that knocks the wind out of you, the kind that makes you wonder where you went wrong, what you missed, what you should have done differently. "Is that what you think?" I asked quietly. He shrugged, casual as anything. "Well, yeah, I mean, that's how it works. Kids inherit stuff. Houses, money, whatever, it's normal. It's normal to push your old man out of his home." "I'm not pushing you out," he said quickly, too quickly. "I'm helping you move to something better. You should thank me honestly. I'm doing the responsible thing here, the mature thing." Mature. Responsible. This boy, my boy, didn't even hear how twisted his thinking had become. I watched him as he leaned forward, elbows on knees, eyes shining with excitement at all the future money he had already spent in his head. He didn't see the house. He saw dollar signs. He saw escape. He saw a solution to problems he created. And the worst part, he truly believed he deserved it. Like the world and I somehow owed him this reward. In that moment, something inside me cracked quietly, painfully. Because I realized my son wasn't asking. He was expecting. He was entitled. He was ready to take what wasn't his, convinced it was his right. He wasn't looking at me like a father. He was looking at me like a roadblock. And that was the moment, the exact breath in time, when I knew this wasn't just a mistake or a panic decision. This was betrayal, calculated, planned, wrapped in pretty words and fake concern. But he had no idea, not one single clue, that I had already shut every door he thought he could walk through. He had no idea the game he thought he was winning. He had already lost. I didn't raise my voice at first. I didn't need to. You could feel the tension in the room thick enough to slice with a butter knife. Ethan sat there with his chest puffed out like he was in control of the conversation, like he already owned the keys to the house, the walls, the memories, like he had already planned where every dollar of the sale would go. He didn't see the storm brewing right in front of him. I leaned back slowly, letting the moment settle, letting him think he still had the upper hand. Then I said, calm as a summer breeze rolling over a quiet lake, "Mate, the house isn't going anywhere, but it's not yours." His entire face shifted. His smile fell first, dropped straight off like it had been peeled away. Then his eyes widened, sharp and panicked, the kind of look people get when reality sucker punches them right in the ribs. "What?" he choked out. "What do you mean it's not mine?" I crossed my legs, not breaking eye contact. The deed had been changed. Now that hit him hard. His mouth opened and closed like he was trying to catch words that kept slipping away. "Changed? What are you talking about? Changed to who?" He leaned forward, voice cracking. "Dad, what did you do?" I shrugged, cool as ever, even though my heart was pounding from the weight of the moment. "Oh, nothing much," I said lightly. "Just protected the one thing in my life no one has the bloody right to take." The words hung there, heavy, final, like the click of a lock turning. He shot up from the couch so fast the cushions bounced. "You can't do that. You can't just take the house away from me." I raised an eyebrow. "Take it away from you? It was never yours to begin with." He started packing, running his hands through his hair, muttering under his breath. The panic was crawling up his throat, twisting his voice into something desperate and strained. "You don't get it. I needed that house. I needed the money. You can't just, Dad, you owe me." That word. That filthy word. Oh. I didn't even give myself time to think. My hand slammed down on the table, so hard the salt shaker jumped. The sound cracked through the room like thunder. "I owe you nothing." Silence fell instantly. It swallowed everything, the air, the space, the tension. Ethan froze mid-step. His mouth hung open but no sound came out. For a moment we just stared at each other, father and son, but we felt like strangers. "You don't get to gamble your life away and expect me to pay the debt," I said, my voice low but sharp. "You don't get to make a baby and expect me to raise it like I didn't already raise you. And you sure as hell don't get to sell my home and pretend you're doing me a favor." He blinked rapidly, tears gathering in the corners of his eyes, not from remorse but from humiliation. He had been caught, exposed, cornered. You don't understand," he stuttered. "I'm in trouble, I don't have options. You." "I gave you options," I cut him off. "Your whole life, more than I ever had, but you chose shortcuts. You chose lies. You chose the easy road every single time until the road ran out." He sank onto the couch, shoulders shaking, face red with anger and shame. "You've ruined my life," he whispered bitterly. That line, my God, that line hit me harder than any punch ever could. I stared at him, this boy I raised, fed, clothed, protected, and I felt an ache so deep it almost buckled me. But I didn't let it show. I steadied myself. "No," I said firmly, "you've ruined your own." He looked up at me with this mixture of disbelief and outrage, like he genuinely thought I was supposed to apologize, hand him the deed back, and let him fix his problems with the home I built nail by nail. But those days were over. The father who picked up after him, laid him out, smoothed over his mistakes. That father had reached his limit. What he didn't know yet was that this moment, this confrontation, was the beginning of something much bigger. A shift. A lesson. A reckoning he'd been avoiding his whole life. Because now that the truth was out, the real fallout was just beginning. The days that followed were the quietest, coldest days I'd lived through in years, and not because of the weather. The air in the house felt heavier, like something had settled in the corners and refused to leave. Ethan didn't call, didn't knock on the door, didn't send a text, not even a lousy "we need to talk." People always say silence is peaceful, that it's calm, healing. But when the silence comes from your own child, the same kid whose scraped knees you bandaged, whose nightmares you chased away, whose birthday candles you lit year after year, that silence feels like a punishment. Like someone pressing their thumb into a bruise just to see if it still hurts. Every day I'd wake up, shuffle into the kitchen, make my coffee and glance at my phone, half expecting it to light up with his name, half expecting him to apologize, half expecting something, anything that showed he still had a piece of a heart left. But there was nothing, just the quiet hum of appliances and the occasional creak of my old floorboards. And I'll admit something I'm not proud of. I question myself. A lot. I'd lay awake at night staring at the ceiling, wondering if I went too far, if maybe I should have softened the blow, said the truth in a gentler way, maybe I should have helped him more, maybe I was too hard on him growing up, maybe I failed him in ways I didn't see. That's the curse of being a parent. No matter how old your kid gets, you always blame yourself first. But then, something happened that shifted everything. One afternoon, as I was raking the leaves in my front yard, I heard the familiar clack of Linda's garden clogs on the pavement. She's my neighbor, been there for years, always watching, always listening, always knowing things before anyone else does. She walked up to the fence with her eyes wide and her lips pressed into a thin line. "Frank," she said, "we need to talk." My stomach twisted. "What's wrong now?" She hesitated, glancing around like she was afraid someone might jump out from behind a tree. "It's about Ethan." Of course it was. Everything lately had been about Ethan. What about him? She sighed, the kind of sigh older people do when they've got news they know will hurt. "He's been talking," she said quietly, "a lot." "Talking about what?" "About you." Those two words alone made my chest tighten. "What did he say?" She stepped closer, lowering her voice even though it was just the two of us. He's been telling folks you're, well, slipping, that you're getting old, forgetting things, making bad decisions. He told Martha you couldn't manage your bills anymore. He told Neil you're confused half the time. I stood there frozen, leaves scattered around my feet, rake hanging from my hand. I didn't blink, didn't breathe. And that's not all, she continued. He said you're not fit to handle important documents, that you need help making choices, that maybe someone else should manage your affairs. My mouth went dry. He said that. She nodded. And he said it more than once, to several people. I felt the world tilt under me. Not because he said it, but because of why he said it. Ethan wasn't just sulking. He wasn't just angry. He wasn't hiding. He was building a story. A narrative. A foundation. One that painted me as incompetent. So he could justify stepping in. So he could go around me. So he could gain control of my home by convincing others I wasn't capable. The betrayal hit so deep it felt like someone had taken a hammer to my chest. This wasn't just selfishness. This wasn't just entitlement. This was manipulation. This was strategy. This was him playing the long game. The boy I raised, the one I sacrificed half my life for, was trying to turn me into a fragile old man in the eyes of the community, just so he could get closer to the house deed he thought belonged to him. It was violation disguised as concern. Greed dressed up as responsibility. A con wrapped in family loyalty. And that right there, that was the moment the last bit of hope inside me snapped. Because betrayal from a stranger is a hit. But betrayal from your own child, that's a wound that doesn't close easy. Standing there with the rake in my hand, leaves swirling around like the wind, knew something I didn't. I realized Ethan's silence wasn't guilt or shame. It was plotting, planning, positioning himself. He wasn't done yet. Not even close. And I knew then painfully, clearly, that the next move would have to be mine. Because this wasn't just about a house anymore. This was about dignity, respect, truth, and a line that should have never been crossed. A month slipped by like fog rolling over an empty field, thick and quiet and impossible to grasp. The house stayed silent, not a knock, not a call, not even the accidental buzz of a text message from Ethan. You would think that after everything, I'd enjoy the quiet, finally some peace in a life that had been pulled and tugged by too many hands. But the truth is, silence hits differently when the person missing from your life is your own child. It doesn't feel like calmness. It feels like being abandoned in a room where every sound echoes too loudly, and every hour drags itself across the floor like a wounded animal. I'd wake up in the morning and make 2 cups of coffee out of habit, one for me, one for the son who used to sit at the breakfast table and eat cereal straight from the box when he was a teenager. I'd pour his cup, realize he wasn't coming, and dump it down the sink. I told myself I was doing fine, told myself I didn't care, told myself a grown man shouldn't be heartbroken by his own kid. But truth is, there's a special kind of ache that only a parent feels, the ache of seeing the child you raised drift so far from the person you knew. I questioned myself more than I'd like to admit. I'd sit on the porch swaying in the evenings and wonder if I pushed him too hard when he was young, if I was too strict or too soft, if I shielded him too much or not enough. I wondered where I went wrong. How did the same boy who once cried because he accidentally stepped on a frog grow into a man who tried to sell the roof over my head? The thoughts kept circling me like vultures, landing and picking at the softer parts of my heart. Then just when I'd almost convinced myself he was gone for good, that our relationship had snapped beyond repair, I heard a knock on the door. Not loud, not forceful. Just 2 timid taps, the kind a child makes when they're scared of waking someone up. I opened the door and there he was. Ethan. My son, But not the version of him I'd seen a month earlier, the arrogant, smirking, entitled version who believed the world owed him something. No. This Ethan looked like he'd been carrying a mountain on his shoulders. His hair was messy, his clothes wrinkled, and his eyes, those eyes were red and swollen like he'd been wrestling with tears for days. He wasn't trying to look tough or confident. He wasn't putting on a show. He just stood there, vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen since he was a little boy with scraped knees. "Dad," he whispered. His voice cracked like something inside him had split open. "Dad, I'm sorry." I didn't speak, I didn't reach for him, I didn't slam the door either. I just waited. He stepped inside slowly, as if afraid the floor might collapse under him, and when he sat down at the kitchen table, he looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, a grown man who suddenly seemed 10 years old again. His hands shook. His lips trembled. He stared at the table like he was reading confessions carved into the wood. "I was desperate," he said, barely getting the words out. "I panicked. I made stupid choices." His voice wasn't angry anymore. It wasn't defensive. It was exhausted, broken, stripped of all the pride he'd wrapped himself in before. "My girlfriend left," he continued. "She said the stress was too much. The baby might not even be mine. I lost my job. I messed everything up." His chest rose and fell too fast, like he couldn't catch his breath. I just wanted something to go right for once. I thought if I could fix everything quickly, maybe life would stop falling apart." There it was, the truth he had been too scared to say before. And sitting there across from him, watching tears spill from the same eyes that once lit up when he saw birthday balloons, I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet. But something gentler, something older, something that had been buried under the rubble of betrayal. Because in that trembling voice, I didn't hear the selfish young man who tried to take my home. I heard the boy I raised. The boy who used to run to me after nightmares. The boy who once hugged me so tight when his first pet goldfish died that I had to pretend I couldn't breathe just to make him laugh. The boy who trusted me. And for the first time in a long time, I could see him again. Not the entitled adult. Not the manipulator. Just my son, scared, lost, drowning in mistakes, and finally reaching up for help instead of trying to take what wasn't his. And that moment was the beginning of everything changing. I pulled out the chair across from him, the same chair he used to sit in as a teenager while complaining about school lunches or retelling stories about the girl he liked in math class, and I motioned for him to sit. His movements were stiff, almost mechanical, like his body wasn't entirely sure it had the right to be in my kitchen anymore. The weight of what had happened between us hung in the air like thick smoke, heavy, choking, impossible to ignore. I let the quiet settle first, not to make him uncomfortable, but because silence can sometimes carve out a space big enough for truth to finally breathe. When I finally spoke, my voice wasn't raised, wasn't sharp, wasn't angry. It was tired, honest, a voice shaped by years of being a father, not by months of being betrayed. "Ethan," I said, leaning forward with my hands clasped together, "owning a house won't fix your life." He looked up, eyes glassy, his face softening with the kind of shame that comes when a person realizes they've been chasing shadows. He opened his mouth as if to argue, to defend himself the way he always did in the past. But then he closed it again, his chin quivering. He just nodded, a small, fragile gesture that carried more weight than any speech he could have made. He sniffled quietly, wiping his nose with the back of his sleeve like a kid who didn't know what to do with his own emotions. "You need to fix yourself first," I continued, letting the words spill slowly, deliberately, making sure each one found its mark. "You've got to take responsibility for the choices you made, every single one. Stop expecting life to hand you shortcuts just because you're struggling. Struggling doesn't entitle you to what isn't yours." I could see the words hitting him not like blows but like realizations he'd been avoiding for far too long. His shoulders shook a little as he swallowed hard, and for a moment he looked like he might break apart completely. He blinked fast, but the tears came anyway, silent, steady, unhidden. He wasn't trying to act tough anymore. There was no ego left to hide behind. He whispered, barely audible, almost like a confession, "So, you'll help me?" The question hovered between us. It wasn't demanding. It wasn't manipulative. It was scared, vulnerable. A question from someone who had finally realized that he couldn't outrun the consequences anymore. He wasn't asking for the house. He wasn't asking for money. He wasn't asking for the easy way out. He was asking for guidance, the kind he should have asked for before he let panic twist him into someone he didn't even recognize. I exhaled a long, heavy sigh, the kind that feels like it's been living in your chest for too many years. "I'll guide you," I said, steady and firm. "I'll stand beside you while you put your life back together, but I won't give you my home. That house is mine until the day I die. I earned it. I built my life inside those walls. I bled for it. I'm not giving that up, not for desperation, not for guilt, not for anyone." His head bowed as he absorbed it, not as a punishment, not as a rejection, but as a boundary he finally respected. And something remarkable happened in that moment. He didn't argue. He didn't complain. He didn't get angry. He didn't try to twist the words into something he could use. Instead, he nodded. A slow, deep nod that came from someplace sincere. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, he understood. He understood that responsibility wasn't something he could skip. He understood that life wasn't fixed by grabbing what wasn't his. He understood that growing up required humility. And he understood that love didn't mean entitlement. In that quiet kitchen, with the afternoon light pouring through the windows and casting long shadows on the table between us, something changed, something small but important. I saw a shift in him, a softening, a grounding. It was like watching a storm finally lose its rage and settle into a tired drizzle. He finally understood the lesson life had been trying to teach him for years. And for the first time in a long, long time, I saw the man he could still become. The months that followed weren't magical, they weren't easy, and they definitely weren't the kind of dramatic overnight transformations you hear about in a sermon or see in a movie. They were slow, awkward, uneven, the kind of months where progress came in inches, not miles, and yet somehow those inches mattered more than any leap he could have made. Ethan started by taking the smallest job he could find, nothing glamorous, nothing impressive, nothing he would have boasted about back when he still believed life owed him a shortcut. He stocked shelves in a hardware store, said the place smelled like sawdust and old nails. Funny thing is, I used to take him to that same store when he was a kid, letting him hold my hand while I picked up tools to keep the house running. Back then he used to stare at the aisles like they were magical. Life has a way of circling back on itself, doesn't it? He worked quietly, stayed late when they needed extra hands, showed up early when someone called in sick. He didn't brag, he didn't complain, he didn't look for applause, and every Friday without fail he tried to put a little bit aside, sometimes $10, sometimes $50, until he finally managed to pay off a chunk of his debt. Not all of it, not even half, but enough that he could finally breathe without feeling like the world was collapsing on top of him. He cut off the toxic friends who kept dragging him down, blocked numbers, deleted contacts, even moved his things out of the apartment he shared with his ex. He told me later she confessed the baby wasn't his after all, something he already suspected but wasn't ready to face until everything else fell apart. I didn't say, "I told you so." God knows life had already said it loud enough. And in the middle of all that rebuilding, he started showing up again, not asking for anything, not hinting, not scheming, just showing up. Sometimes he'd knock on my door holding a toolbox saying, "Fence is leaning a bit, want a hand?" Other times he'd swing by to mow the yard, claiming he needed the exercise, even though we both knew he hated mowing since he was 12. We didn't talk about the house for a long time. We didn't need to. There was no tug of war anymore. No hidden agendas. Just a man trying to make things right and a father trying to figure out how to trust him again slowly, one conversation at a time. And those conversations, simple, quiet, ordinary, became the threads that stitched us back together. He'd ask about my day, I'd ask about his. Sometimes we'd sit on the porch after fixing something and watch the sun melt behind the trees, neither of us speaking. Silence used to be a wound between us. Now it was healing. My home, my refuge, my hard-earned sanctuary, finally felt safe again. Not because I had locked it away or guarded it like a dragon hoarding gold, but because the person who once tried to take advantage of it finally understood what it meant to value something you didn't own. And somewhere in the slow rebuilding of his life, something else rebuilt itself too, us. Not the old version, not the strained version, not the hopeful but blind version. A new one, a better one, a real one. And that's when I realized something deeper, something I wish I'd learned earlier in life. Sometimes the greatest act of love isn't giving your child everything they reach for. It's teaching them how to reach for it the right way. Sometimes saying no isn't selfish. Sometimes no is the first brick in the foundation of their adulthood. A father's job isn't to shield his child from responsibility. A father's job is to make sure they grow strong enough to carry it. My house, it's still mine. Its walls are still filled with the stories I built, the sweat I poured, the nights I stayed awake repairing what broke. My peace, still intact, still steady, still the one thing I guard like treasure. And my son, he finally learned the lesson life had been screaming at him, long before I ever raised my voice. He learned that shortcuts rot the ground beneath your feet. He learned that desperation doesn't justify betrayal. He learned that entitlement is a poison that kills slowly. And most importantly, he learned the truth that every grown person eventually has to swallow. You can't take what was never yours. You earn what you want. You build what you need. You grow into the person capable of holding the life you dream of. And that, mates, is the story of the house he tried to sell, the father he nearly lost, and the lesson that finally saved him.